Welcome to today's webinar, When Children Succeed, a Collective Impact Success Story. We have with us today Sherri Torjman, Monica Chaperlin, and Christine Roy. This webinar is brought to you by Tamarack Institute's Communities Ending Poverty. We are a network of poverty reduction collaboratives in 90+ communities seeking to end poverty locally. My name is Maureen Owens, Manager of Communities for the Community Ending Poverty Division of Tamarack. Next slide, please. I would like to begin today's webinar with an acknowledgement. No matter where you are calling from today, we want to recognize that we are gathering on Indigenous land, and we are grateful that we can meet. We thank Indigenous peoples who cared for and are still caring for this land. It is our job as settlers to commit to learning the history, the promise, and the challenges of the TRC. I am calling in from Treaty 1 territory, or colonially named Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. This is the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene, and Métis. Treaty 1 is also known as the Stone Fort Treaty. It was signed on August the 3rd, 1871 at Lower Fort Garry, a stone fort about an hour's north of Winnipeg. The agenda for today's webinar consists of a fireside discussion on St. John's powerful initiative to improve grade 3 literacy rates in low-income schools. And it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Sherri Torjman. Sherri is the writer who accepted the task of synthesizing St. John's journey into a short, impactful, and readable case study titled St. John Stronger Together. So we'll pop that into the chat, and it'll also be made available on the follow-up email. Sherri was the Vice President of the Caledon Institute of Social Policy for 25 years and is currently a social policy consultant. She has made valuable contributions to social policy in Canada through her analysis, writing, and public speaking on child benefits, welfare reform, disability income and supports, home care, caregiver needs, and now community-based poverty reduction. Welcome, Sherri. I will turn things over to you now.
Next slide, please. Thank you so much, Maureen, for that very kind introduction, and welcome to everybody on the line. As Maureen said, I had the honor and the pleasure of being asked to document the story of St. John, New Brunswick, or as I call it, the little city that could, because they have achieved so much over the past 2 decades, actually. And we have with us today 2 guests who will tell you about some of their amazing work. Today, we're going to focus on one specific initiative called When Children Succeed. But it's really important to understand that that one initiative is part of a broader range of activities that all fit together. They all weave together into a coherent whole. And while we're going to be digging deep today into that one specific effort, it's important to recognize that there is a big world of activity underway in St. John. So next slide, please. Perhaps if we remember anything from today's presentation is these 3 words: together we create, because I heard this so many times from Monica, from Kathy Wright, who was involved in this initiative, from Christine Roy, who we'll be speaking with today. It's together we create, and I think it's the beauty of collective impact. It really is so well illustrated in St. John. It is a team, it is many teams. It's those many teams who are all rowing together. And I found that it has made it so powerful and successful because of that attention to collective impact. Next slide, please. So what did they go about doing? How do you go about actually working on generational poverty and addressing it? First, the community did its homework. It looked up the evidence on reducing poverty. It looked up the evidence on reducing generational poverty. It took them to several pillars, including the education pillar, and it also took them to literacy and reading and working with children. So this is an evidence-based piece of work, and that's been critical to the success of this work. Next slide, please. Next, it counted. Numbers and data are incredibly important, and the business community has been very actively involved in this project, as you'll hear. And they insist on numbers and they insist on data, partly to understand the scope of the problem, but partly to be able to track progress over time. And that counting and monitoring of data continue, and you'll hear that in the presentation. Next, please. And then equally important to evidence and to data are the stories of people in the community. I found that those organizers in St. John listened to community members. They went into neighborhoods and really spent time understanding what some of the concerns were. And so together, the evidence, the research, the data, and the stories were put together into the activities that were undertaken. Next, please. And so the community went around, figuring out what can we do now? What are the various areas in which we can get involved? And you see all these colors to represent the many, many areas and many activities in which this community is engaged. It looks like these are very neatly lined up. It was actually a story where there's a lot of bumps along the way, and it's not as neat as this picture implies. In fact, they colored outside of the box in many cases, and that actually contributed to the success of the work. Next, please. So whatever they did, the message was very clear. We are here to support you. We are here to support communities, the priority neighborhoods that we've identified, and a whole series of supports were set up to help neighborhoods. You'll hear about the employment pillar, the education pillar, and the health pillar. But at the end of the day, the center was vibrant and healthy neighborhoods, and a range of supports was put in place to ensure that all families were able to participate actively in those neighborhoods. Next, please. And here's the message for everybody. You belong here. You belong in this school, you belong in this neighborhood, and we're going to work together to ensure that you hear that. Next, please. And so now we're at the point after 20 years, perhaps more, of sharing that information, of sowing the seeds and sharing them, partly through discussions like this, partly through the story, and very much by talking to people in the community. And you'll hear about how Monica and Christine spoke to people in the education sector and other sectors, local governments, to be able to help them understand exactly what they were doing, to move from just an experiment to pilot and ideally into policy application. And finally, the big message, final slide, please. Dream big. That's what they did. They dreamed big. And today we're going to speak to two big dreamers, big thinkers, and big doers. And on that note, I'd like to introduce our speakers today, Monica Chaperlin and Christine Roy. Monica's passion is learning the ways and means to improve the social foundations that cause communities to thrive. She's the coordinator of the Business Community Anti-Poverty Initiative, or BCAPI, an organization of business leaders collaborate with community and government to end generational poverty in St. John, New Brunswick. Helping every child succeed from cradle to career is BCAPI's primary focus. And prior to BCAPI, Monica worked inside government and community organizations to help drive social innovation in municipal services, community health, housing, and urban planning. Christine Roy is principal of St. John the Baptist King Edward School in St. John. For more than 16 years, she's transformed this inner city locale into a thriving, inclusive community hub that emphasizes lasting connections with families, both students and adults. She's a recipient of the Learning Partnership Canada Outstanding Principal Award in 2016. Christine's work focuses on trauma and the role it plays in student communities suffering from generational poverty and adverse childhood experiences. This philosophy informs her role as educator and leader, and is the lens through which the school and the staff operate. Christine is a most valued and effective member of the community who knows that all relationships must begin with trust and with understanding. And on that note, I'd like to turn the floor over to Monica Chaperlin. Monica, maybe you can tell us about the context, how you initially set up this project, your main pillars, and how all these pieces actually fit. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you, Sherri, for so beautifully telling St. John's story, and most importantly, for being the author of the story to help get our message out, and that this work is valuable, and it does a lot to change things in communities and improve us. My job is really to give you a little context to the actual project. We want to show you as an example of how projects evolve and what impact they're able to make. And so the next slide, I think, is really this is really big picture St. John's poverty reduction strategy. Essentially, it's a whole community approach to tackling the deep inequities that cause people to be trapped in poverty. And how we do that is the hard work, and it is really defined by how we are able to improve the pathways that achieve health and well-being for people, education success, and employment success. And so really it focuses on the key determinants of health and how we build the assets and the supports that people need to thrive, as opposed to trying to just address the problems. Many of the problems disappear if we can achieve these things. Next slide. Oh, we want to focus on the education pillar. And do you mind, Jamie, just going back one slide? Sorry. Is that the three pillars are really health, education, and employment, but at the center of the decision making for our community are the people who live the experience. They're our best informants, they're our best teachers, and they're best evaluators in terms of telling us what's working, what's not working, what they need, and how to do it better, then in more useful ways for them. So we're going to zero in on the education pillar as the next slide. So I think it's just, everybody already knows this, how important children's education success is. Education is a powerful pathway out of poverty, and it's important to every child. And by putting a lot of emphasis in this particular pillar, really it's a high value pillar in that the investment in the children ripples off to the whole community, to our province, to our society. And it's a smart thing to do from an economist point of view, but from a scientist point of view, it's really about the importance of children's education success because of the rapid development of all our brains in childhood, that we need to make sure that the experiences are positive and solid, that really wire the brain in all the right ways. And the impact is strongest from the moment a child is born in the early years, and still remains very high right through to high school completion age group. And it's always good for anyone, education, but it's a little harder to accomplish by the time we get it as adults, as we get more set in our ways, maybe. So we just continually remember that children's healthy development is extremely important to their life success. That's truly important. The experiences in early childhood set the stage for life, and that's why we have to get it right with kids. Next slide. So this is the sort of demographic picture of child poverty in our city, St. John. And as you can see, this was before COVID data, just because the recent data, we don't know the impact of all the of COVID yet in terms of, have we really reduced poverty or just short term for a little while? But 1 in 3 children in the city live in poverty compared to maybe 1 in 4 in New Brunswick and 1 in 5 in Canada. So it's we do have an elevated child poverty rate, and it's indicative of family poverty, that our families are trapped in poverty. A higher percentage of children live in poverty than adults in St. John. And then you see that in our inner city neighborhoods, we have extraordinary rates of child poverty where it's heavily concentrated. And it's another barrier for children to thrive, for children and families to thrive, because the poverty rates, there's so many issues and problems that every family is facing. And maybe it adds to neglect from our city over the years too, is that, it's not those neighborhoods we live in, so we don't experience it in the same way as people who live it. And so this is really the picture of that we have set for ourselves to be able to break that cycle of poverty through by improving children's well-being and education success. Next slide, please. And the reality is, this is general. It certainly doesn't apply to every child, but the reality is, according to Harvard anyway, we don't have Canadian data that's well researched to be able to compare this to, but we think it mirrors very much what St. John School's experience is that without really strong positive interventions that support children's well-being in the early years and the family's well-being in early years, the children tend to come to kindergarten well behind in their development compared to other children. And then what happens without intervention is that their gap continues to increase. By the time they get to grade 12, they can be fully 4 years behind their peers. And so, we see that in the sense of dropouts, a lot of children struggling in their day-to-day life at school. And our job is to close the gap for them so that they don't have to deal with these extraordinary barriers to their education success. Next slide. So within the education pillar, this is our strategy, is to close the education gap. Our aspiration is that every child succeeds. We're not going to leave one child behind. Every child matters. All the lingo, but we're really trying to make it happen. And we have a cradle to career approach, how we help families from the moment a child is born to how we support that child's development through every year of their life until they're economically independent, really. And so it's a big job, and that's why it has to be a whole community approach. Our neglect means we have to develop many innovations and initiatives that wraps the supports around children and families in ways that cause them to thrive and succeed in school. And essentially the 20 years we've spent are building those initiatives at every stage of a child's life in our low-income neighborhoods to ensure that they have the supports that they need to succeed. And we know essentially our parents and schools can't do it alone. It takes a whole community approach. And so our work has been really engaging a lot of organizations from every sector to participate and help in some ways. help the families, help the neighborhoods, help the schools. And so that they have the resources and the support and the equipment and all those things that they need to do a good job, their primary job as parent and neighborhood and school. So if you read Sherri's case study, then you'll see a lot of the initiatives identified. But today we really want to just focus on one of the initiatives. It's the early lit that really is for the component of early literacy success. It's one of the fundamental. It's very important that we ensure children have strong education foundations, and those early grades are extremely important that we close the gap. The sooner we close the gap, as the other slides have shown, the easier it is for a child to succeed. If we wait until a teenager, it's very, very hard for a teenager to succeed. So it's easier if we do it as soon as possible, and those early grades and foundational skills children need are vital. So I think that's the last slide, is it? And to introduce the project, it's a K-2 project that involves all 7 elementary schools that support our low-income neighborhoods. And these schools are essentially our goal through this project, When Children Succeed, is that every K-2 student will have closed the gap. And there's about 1,000 children in the 7 schools that have participated in this project, and we're pretty proud of the success. And so this video will introduce it, and then Christine will tell you all about it.
When Children Succeed is a collaborative project between BCAPI, the Business Community Anti-Poverty Initiative, Living St. John, the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development, and Anglophone South School District. The project involves kindergarten to grade 2 students in 7 of the inner city schools in St. John, where we see very high rates of childhood poverty. The project sees additional educators placed to work with the students in those 7 schools.
It provides students with the opportunity to have very small directed instruction. It lets teachers work together in tandem, and it allows us for really data-driven decision-making when it comes to student learning.
It's just not adding teachers. Adding teachers doesn't necessarily equate to student success. It's really the intentionality behind the teachers that have been added into our buildings. We know that if we fill in the gaps for students at K-2, give them a very strong foundation, that they're going to be successful longer in their school careers and in life.
It's really allowed us to give them an opportunity every single day to meet with us, which is really supporting them not just academically in literacy and numeracy, but really supporting them emotionally too.
So for instance, in our school, every child has 2 teachers during literacy time to receive explicit instruction and feedback, which means every child is being seen every day. So we're really targeting what needs to be done for our students intentionally.
And because the kids have a variety of teachers coming in and working with them and supporting them, it really is a community approach to teaching the kids.
I think they feel supported more than they ever have felt supported, and they're becoming more risk takers with their learning. You've got kids running over to the table saying, is it my turn? Can we work yet? Am I ready? Is it my turn? I want to go. So that really encourages us as teachers, because when kids are that motivated to want to learn, obviously it motivates us to do our best too.
no kids get lost, when you have that opportunity to really connect with students. The teachers and the parents can be like real partners when it comes to the child's education. They can really be a team, the message that Peyton's getting at home, like our daughter's getting at home from us about how important math and science are in education, she's getting the exact same message in her classroom from someone that she trusts and loves and respects.
Oh, I love reading. I read at home a lot. Like, we started off with not very big books, and now we're reading a bunch of big books. I like to read books without pictures and books with pictures. It's very fun to read all sorts of books. I feel excited because learning is my favorite thing to do. My favorite book, I don't have a favorite book. They're all good.
Thank you, Monica, for that introduction and that for showing that wonderful video about this amazing initiative. And you made clear that you did your homework, and I think it was probably Peyton and Michael in the film who had encouraged you to go do your homework and look at those books with the pictures and without pictures to get the evidence to do this work. It was just fabulous. Thank you. And I'd like to turn the floor over now to Christine, because we've set the context. And Christine, maybe you can tell us, what did you do exactly? And what I think what became clear from this video and from what Monica said is that you focus not only on the school itself and the students themselves, but the broader community as well. So perhaps you could tell us a bit about, the school within the school, and then the school as part of that neighborhood.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for allowing me to join in the conversation today. It's very exciting, especially when you see those students that are speaking in that video. That's why we're here, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. I think Monica kind of hit on it earlier. I'm part of, our school is one of 7 that are part of When Children Succeed project. We're identified by the high poverty and child poverty, but in particular generational poverty within this community. I think traditionally, when you look at how our schools were supported, a lot of times people tend to focus on, I call it the tip of the iceberg, those basic needs that you can see above the surface, feeding kids, providing school supplies, clothing. And there's certainly important barriers to remove because kids can't learn when they're hungry. But what's often missing is really, when you eliminate those barriers, what else is preventing kids from learning and moving forward and filling in those gaps. And what you see within our schools, when you dive beneath the surface, just like that iceberg, there's a vast bunch of complexities that we have to deal with, that the business community was really willing to dive in with us and to examine that to see how can we fix that problem, because a lot of our students were coming in far below their peers developmentally, with oral language delays, struggling with emotional regulation, having difficulty with cognitive skills, having a lot of different types of diagnoses such as autism or ADHD, and then coming with an array of sometimes very complex trauma and adversities. And so they're coming in with all these huge gaps that we want to fill in before they leave grade 2, because we know, and we've seen that data ourselves internally, creates greater gaps as they go up. And I think for us as a school, I can speak to the fact that we were doing so many great things as a school in taking a trauma lens and supporting our kids social emotionally, but we were still really struggling with that piece of how do we go and fit in and close those gaps with that academic piece there. How do we go and fill it all in? I think we were really struggling that we had these huge complexities and compositional issues within a classroom, and how we're funded within our school system is really not based on needs and complexities and adversities, but really based on a formula, which is number of students in a classroom for a teacher. And that really kind of highlights, the differences between, or the disparities between the have and have-nots. So what the business community has allowed us to do is to really examine what would happen if we provided more supports in terms of teaching, differentiated funding to address all those complexities that exist within our classroom. And more importantly, to not just dump in resources, to really have intentionality behind what we were doing with those resources. How are we going to use that? And so for us, it was really a professional learning journey as a staff, as teachers, to examine best evidence-based practices. What do we need to do differently for literacy? So really looking at the research behind science of reading and structured literacy, diving into those specific components and really reflecting on our practices. We knew based on research that explicit instruction for our students drives learning, and so does feedback, but we have to ensure we're using the best practices possible. And so we really took those resources, allocated with intentionality and also sense of urgency. We want to go and fill in those gaps before they leave grade 2, because we know that's the best success for our students as they leave the school system, graduating and being successful. So we really took a lot of time to really frame how we're using our teachers to provide explicit instruction each and every day for our students in math and literacy, using the best practices that are there, using formative assessment to drive instruction and to provide feedback for our students. And along with that, also supporting the social emotional needs of our students, building relationships, and then taking that and extending it to our families that are so important and part of this journey as well. And so to me, this is really innovative, creative thinking on behalf of business, to not just look at the tip of the iceberg, which is so traditional and easy for people to think, oh, we're going to fix poverty by feeding and clothing. And yes, that's one component, but to really dive in deep and say, hey, we have a huge vast network of complexities here. How can we work together to solve this? Because we know if we can research and work together and solve this, we're going to go and help eradicate generational poverty within these communities. And I think to really stress that within St. John, this is generational poverty for several generations here within these communities. We want these families and children to be successful. They are the best families you can imagine, and they care about their kids and they want them to be successful. We just have to provide those tools and that motivation to kind of work collaboratively together. And we were able to do that, and we were empowered as a school to do that from the support of the business community, and to also advocate for our government to make policy changes that make sense when you're looking at how do we end poverty. We have to start to think and work and do some upstream thinking here and not be reactionary. Let's be responsive. Let's be responsive to the needs within our schools and our community. And this has been done so beautifully with the partnerships. I like to say our business community is our biggest cheerleaders within the school system, our biggest support network. These folks are highly invested and care. And when you have a community of caring adults, I always say it takes a village to raise kids. It takes a village to educate kids. And this is a caring community with a collective response that realizes this is not just a problem for a school stuck in a priority community. This is a collective community problem, and we have to solve it together. And how empowering for everyone.
Fantastic. And congratulations on all the work that you've done with this amazing project, you and your team, your staff, the whole community. You said a number of things that I think are worth highlighting, Christine, because you were saying what was so important to you was ensuring that children themselves had confidence and support, that they got the message that they could do this, that they were, they could be terrific learners. They were terrific learners, and they became confident in themselves to be able to participate and to want to read and enjoy learning. That's wonderful in itself. And you did that by ensuring that you and your staff knew some of the research methods or the empirical evidence that was pointing out the best ways to help children with literacy. So it wasn't just a question of, going in there and saying, let's read with the children. You did your homework again, and you found out what was the evidence that said these were effective methods of enabling children or helping children to improve their literacy. And you also, a third component I thought was very important, was providing support to the community. You become almost like a neighborhood hub, where you're encouraging the neighborhood to come in so that the parents feel comfortable in this school. I think that's a very important aspect of breaking generational poverty, feel comfortable with the school. Now, you've talked at length, I think, about the role of the business community, and I want to turn back now to Monica, who's been part of the Be Happy initiative, who's been the face of Be Happy, really, and I think has just done an outstanding job of representing the business sector and making sure that they understand how important it is to become involved in some of these social issues, which have a big economic impact at the end of the day, as you pointed out. Monica, I wonder if first you can show us some of the results of the project, some of your successful results, because we're always interested and concerned about results, and you do a lot of counting, so you do have some material on results. And then maybe you can talk just a bit more generally about the role of the business community in the St. John Initiative and in this When Children Succeed. Jamie, can we go back to the slides for a minute? There are two slides that came right after the video that talked about the results. Do we have those? Yes, thank you. Thanks, Jamie.
A moment.
It's just right after the video.
Yeah, so I'm just, I don't have a slide of the actual project results, but it was in the video. And I'll just emphasize that the kindergarten children, this project actually was started just before COVID started. So I want to put the framing on this is that the children's success is incredible considering 3 years of COVID that this program operated under. And the stresses on the teachers and how they still were a mighty team that drove this project forward and got the success for the children. But the kindergarten children exceeded the literacy benchmark. The grade 1 children exceeded the literacy benchmark, and the grade 2 children were almost there. And so we know that as this project continues, the grade 2 students will get there because they will have had the base of kindergarten and grade 1 to build their skills. So we're so excited. We had no expectation, even though we hoped and we were investing in the fact that this project would work. We had no expectation throughout COVID that the children would do as well as they did, and we were just totally shocked. And I have to give all tribute to the teachers for completely changing their teaching approach. To personalize the educational experience for each child and for actually changing how they teach literacy. I don't know, that's a simple non-educator way of saying that, but actually they've tested a new model that New Brunswick is going to be embracing for all schools. So we're pretty excited that they were the test site for this, and it worked. And now the province wants the rest of the schools K-2 to be using this approach as well. I think, but overall, in terms of the education pillar, we do track the progress of the children the best we can. And so I just had 2 slides to show you is that for the children in early childhood, for 0 to 5, their readiness for kindergarten, you can see the blue is our children from our low-income neighborhoods, and the red is the school district average. And you can see the gap slowly closing. There's no miracles here. It takes time, and we keep improving the programs so that we keep closing the gap. But we're very pleased to see that the children many more children are ready for kindergarten than when we started. And then the last slide is the high school graduation rates, and the lower line are the students the teens who live in the low-income neighborhoods versus the rest of the teens in St. John. And you can see that the gap is slowly closing as a result of all of the interventions. So there's no one intervention, but each of them are important, and it's how they fit together, like pieces of a quilt or whatever, in the right ways that support the children from cradle to career. that we think is really working. And of course, with the addition of the When Children K-2 project succeed, When Children Succeed K-2 project, we know that that gap is going to close even more now that we found the route forward to closing their achievement gap in literacy and numeracy. It's much stronger foundations. So we're very, it's a work in progress, and we won't stop until we've closed the gap.
And in the story, the St. John story, you can see data on a number of other initiatives as well. So if anybody has any questions on data and how St. John went about collecting information, that would be a good resource for you, I think, and we'll provide you some directions as to how to reach our speakers at the end of this session. There are a few questions, and I just thought maybe we can weave them into our conversation at this point, because I think they relate to the issues that you've raised, and particularly the description that you provided, Christine. And there was a question asking, how actually did you create a community hub? How did you engage parents, and were they invited into the school, for example, to read with the children? Were they volunteers? What did you do with the parents to make this a bigger picture than just focusing on the individual students themselves?
We had a lot of work that we've done within our school in the last several years, especially leading into COVID, where it was really about being intentional and working with our families and inviting them in. A lot of our families having been in a neighborhood where perhaps school was not the most inviting place, or perhaps not as responsive. School is a daunting place for many of them. And what could we do to kind of bridge that gap and kind of forge relationships? And so what happened as a result, as we've seen, oh my goodness, my phone's going, so it's apologies, is we really looked at, I'm going to turn that off, I apologize. Unfortunately, the downside when you're in your school and in your building working, unfortunately, you hear all this chaos here. We really brought the families in. One thing we were really proud of is we created parents as partners at the K-2 level, which was very huge part of the COVID, and we're trying to get that back up and running, where we brought our families in on the last Friday of the month in the afternoon. And we engaged them with the teachers, really looking at some areas such as how do you support oral language with your children? How can you develop those skills for playing board games, for instance, and having conversations at night? So we would do some learning with our families, and then they would go and join their children and engage in those activities within the classroom. And we were having a huge turnout of parents and families coming in, like upwards of 95% of our families turning out. That really showed us, parents do care. They care and they want their children to be successful. We just have to provide that invitation. A lot of times people don't know, and it's about how we can bring awareness and education. We really continued that during COVID, which was very important to us, by keeping lines of communication open, ensuring that we had opportunities to check in and visit our families and do just even, we call them rise and shine, like sunshine visits, where we stop in and see our families and say, hi, how are you doing? Drop off a pizza and just keep that connection. It's all about connection. And even how we operate today, we have adults on our front doors when kids come in, is greeting and talking to our families and making sure that we're there to be responsive to any of their needs and concerns, and that our door is open to greet them and sit down at the table and to work with them with whatever we need to do.
It's clear that you've made them feel welcome as part of the school. They truly are welcome in your school. In fact, that was one of them phoning you right now. The call that you turned off, that was a parent.
Probably. I hear my poor admin assistant's phone is just ringing nonstop. It gets a little bit chaotic in here. They're not used to my door closed here, actually, because I'm usually out and about and greeting people. So yes, I think it's about being responsive. It's also about, I would highlight this to anyone, it's about building relationships with our families, with our community members, to be authentic. And I think because our partners within our community are so visible and so invested within our school, our families recognize that as well and really genuinely appreciate that other people care about their children, care about the community. And I think it's so important in a community with generational poverty at times where their voices are disenfranchised, that we empower people. And I think that's a lot of what we're doing too, is working with our families to empower them so that they have a voice within their community, within their schools, to voice their concerns and take on some advocacy and also some leadership if need be as well.
To you for a minute, because we had a question about the business community and how did the business community become engaged in this particular initiative, but probably the question applies to this whole St. John anti-poverty initiative more generally. It actually drove the whole initiative. So you may want to just speak very briefly to that. And another question related to the health sector. Was the health sector at all engaged in this particular work? So perhaps you can respond to those questions. And Christine, you may want to add a few things, but go ahead, Monica.
Yeah, so I think it stems from the beginnings of the Business Community Anti-Poverty Initiative. It's an organization, a collective of business leaders who organize to help the community reduce poverty. And this is a table of business leaders who have stayed on and continued to learn and work with, we just support the initiatives that our nonprofits and our schools and our neighborhoods are telling us are needed, and try to help make those programs and services happen how business can contribute in so many different ways. And I think the business organizations themselves have had lots of years of experience of being volunteers in the schools. They encourage their staff to participate in various initiatives. And we're quite a learning community in that regard, is that through participation, we learn a lot more about poverty and what reduces it and how to help. And so I think it's just a natural 20-year journey the business leaders have been on and their organizations to help in all of, each and every initiative in some way. So for this particular project, we have had good working relationships with our school district, our superintendent who introduced the project in the video, and the schools that serve the children. And we, each step of the way, we make sure that we're doing what the school district needs, what the families need, and what the neighborhood needs. And so we don't lead projects. We just say, how do we help? And I think that's, and together then we figure out as a collective what might work. We do our research, as you say, and we build programs carefully. And so this particular program, the ways we helped was we raised money so that the schools could have the additional teachers. But we also encouraged government to come in and help with the funding of it. And, that's the only way it got funded. It was $1.5 million a year, but you can see that in the video, the list of people who helped to sponsor it. Well, they're all people who've been involved in some way in St. John's work, and they continue to support it because they see the results and they see success. But we have to say that the real experts in all of this work, what actually gets done are the parents, the nonprofits that support the neighborhoods and the schools, and then the neighborhoods and schools themselves. It's we help and we try to apply our resources, but we are pretty solid about ensuring there's strong business case for projects that get underway, that they're well evaluated, that they're built from research. These are just things that is important to business because we know we have to show results to attract investors.
Exactly. And Christine, you've also talked in the past, I think, about the fact that the business community helped open some doors for you with government people. And that is going to help at a policy level, move from pilot project, which they're now supporting, and New Brunswick Education is now supporting, to a, perhaps across the province, and to making the policy changes that you talked about with respect to the funding arrangement for support for learning. So perhaps you can just speak briefly to the role that, the doors that the business community helped open for you. And if either of you can talk briefly to some of the Indigenous ways of knowing and learning that may have, you may have incorporated within your work, please feel free to do that as well. We've had some questions about that. So just over to you, Christine. And then we're going to have to unfortunately move into wrap up very soon. So just so you know, go ahead.
Well, I think it's just an important conversation to recognize that we have our whole community of business people that are really engaging in conversation with government to be more responsive to our schools, and not just to look at numbers as an equation for teaching staff, to really look at what are the complexities that are there and what responsibilities do we have to ensure that all students receive an equitable education. And fair is not equal, as we say, and that sometimes we do need extra resources to hit all the needs and complexities that we have within our communities, and that we have a responsibility to do so. So it was very it's hopeful, I guess, because we've been having this dialogue and conversation. I've been here 16 years, for many years, and to now have these conversations and seeing that our government is invested to provide some of that funding for this very project, it's very hopeful that we're going to see that change hopefully come out of this, because we know it's making a difference. When we were talking about results, one of the greatest things for me is when I was looking at my grade 3 data here after Christmas, so we could look at regrouping kids for flexible groupings for literacy, is to see our grade 3 students who participated in this in K1 and 2 during COVID interruptions, mind you, are surpassing data of students in grade 4 and 5. And these are students that come with their invisible baggage to school with lots of complexities and needs, and they are filling in gaps and they are learning. And to us, that's a celebration. That is success for us. So we're certainly seeing the impact, and we appreciate just having this dialogue open, that we can really make responsive changes to ensure that all students are going to learn.
Right. Now, you mentioned 16 years, and Monica, you made reference in your remarks to 20 years. And that tells me that this is a very long-term work, that you don't get results overnight. And for anybody on the phone on this call who's thinking, oh, this is long-term work, yes, it is. But don't get discouraged. You're seeing two people and a community that has achieved so much over time and has documented many, many changes over time. So don't lose heart. This is a long-term project, but it's worth it at the end of the day. It certainly is. We have a lot of different questions. So I mentioned the health pillar question before. We didn't actually get to that yet. There was a question about how did you calculate the cost of poverty and the return on your investment? I think those are big, complicated questions. If either of you in the last 2 minutes would like to jump in and address either of those questions, please feel free to do that. And then we're going to have to wrap up. So Monica.
I could say and I hope I have the organizations. We relied on the Center for Policy Alternatives. The national organization has measured the cost of poverty in various provinces, and they did one for New Brunswick and identified the cost to New Brunswick is in the consequences of poverty are $2 billion a year. So the expertise lies elsewhere in Canada around how you actually measure that. So we just borrow from the best that we can find.
That's very important, though. That's, I think, very, very helpful to look for. Somebody mentioned the Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives, and there are places that actually do this, and you can rely on those resources to help you with that. Christine, any other sort of last thoughts or words?
I would really say that it's really what we're seeing is really a community response to solve a generational problem and issue within our community, that collective response, the business community. And really, when children succeed is just one aspect. I'm also very fortunate in my building to have an early learning hub, which provides support for children that are infants up to school age and also after school programming. And they work with the families and identify children and families and put resources and help that seamless transition into school, which is huge. And they start those relationships before they even enter school. So we've seen the huge impact of that in our building for 15 years now. So, I mean, we've had so much being done and we're seeing the dividends of it. And it's all about the relationships and the connections and connecting one another together to realize that, you know, we have to take a collective approach with how we solve the problems in our community. And certainly school would be one example of that.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you both so much for your wonderful presentations and your amazing work in St. John. I hope you continue for another 36 years together. Carry on.
Well, thank you so much. We could have spoke all day, right, Monica?
We had many questions that were unanswered, and I apologize to those who did get their questions answered, but please feel free to send any comments or questions to Maureen at Tamarack, and she'll put you in touch with Monica and Christine, who will be able to follow up. And I'd just like to quote Heather in concluding. Heather, thank you for letting us know change is not an event, but can be a very long process, but wholeheartedly worth it. And I think you heard that message today from our speakers and from the work from all the members of the community in St. John. So thank you so much, all of you. And I'll turn the floor over now to Maureen.
Thank you so much, Sherri. What a skilled facilitator you are. And thank you so much to our panelists. What an amazing story of collective impact. I feel like this project can be scaled to fit in so many of our communities and just such a real example of preventative upstream work. So congratulations. I'll just run through a couple of upcoming learning events. If you have a moment, Jamie, to put the slides back on. The first one is our Communities Ending Poverty virtual national gathering, which will be on April 25th to the 27th. The link is there for you to register, and we'll be co-creating a plan for resiliency that moves beyond ending poverty and toward economic mobility in ways that honor people, partnerships, and the planet. The next webinar that I'll highlight is, it's called Building Sustainable Collaborations from the Start. This is on March the 29th. Many collaboration efforts don't intentionally plan for longer term. We seek funding in a response to immediate problem. Once the funding ends, the good work often does as well. But typically the community need does not go away. So this webinar will discuss how collaborations can benefit from focusing on developing a sustainability approach during the early phases of their work. And finally is our survey slide, which Jamie popped in the chat. Your opinion is important to us. We invite you all to comment on this presentation. And we thank you for joining us today. And as we've said a couple times, the follow-up email should go out in a couple days, and we will link in the recording, the slides, and we'll highlight the resources that were shared today as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panelists and Sherri for facilitating.